Chapter 2. The Crash. You would think listening to dozens upon dozens of safety procedures would have prepared me for such an ordeal. In truth, it did jack shit. I didn't search for my oxygen mask or pray to God. I sat there and froze like Walt Disney on his deathbed, trapped within the binding chasm of inner turmoil and my mind screaming that the end was nigh. Before we continue, do yourself a favor. Disregard the depictions of plane crashes found in cheesy popcorn flicks. The ones where the Hollywood heartthrob comes to the rescue to pilot the plane and save the day. In reality, it's nothing more than a few seconds of horrific consciousness, and then with a snap of a finger, you're gone into darkness. In an instant, I woke up with a life jacket on, swelled to a pulp as blood rushed to the doldrums of my skull. We made a direct impact, and the plane was upside down. Of course it was, because a plane crash isn't difficult enough. I then unbuckled my seatbelt and plunged downward, splattering my face against the writhing edge of a luggage compartment. You can thank my adrenaline for keeping me going at that point. Now the fun part, my heroic escape. As I stood up, gallons of blood gushed from my nostrils. The bridge of my nose cracked, but that was the least of my concerns. Spurts of red spewed out like a faucet while I glanced up at my fellow passengers, who in one word could only be described as maniacal. I witnessed nothing short of pure anarchy. Half of my flight companions were already dead, while the remaining survivors wished they had shared that same fate. Limbs bent, bones sprung through skin, and chairs that received a brand new helping of scarlet paint. Screams that scratched against the fibers of my eardrums. A monstrous stress that magnified with each wretched second that drifted by. From the corner of my eye, I could see human beings convulsing on the ground, gutted and transfused by their self-destructive thoughts. Jittery and slimed with gore, whisking away like slugs teetering atop a salt pile. It was like a positive feedback loop that poured droves of gasoline atop a bonfire. Composure and time for safety evaporated the second we hit the waves. Instead, they were replaced with bloodshed. No one took direction or listened to the shouting JetBlue staff, their suggestions drowned in a choir of hapless screeches and distress, all of which shot into my mind like blade-tethered bullets. I let them pierce for a few seconds, accepting my new reality, how my life could fade. A thought I speared and pummeled until it soared below the confines of my conscience, suppressing it into submission as a new thought foamed into a catalyst for action, my body leaping from the ashes into complete survival mode. I hastily made my way through the mob of panic as men, women, and children fought for life. The emergency lights were on, and the "you're about to drown" clock kept ticking. I wish I could tell you I helped unbuckle my fellow passengers and became a hero who rescued everyone. Instead, my focus was purely on exiting a plummeting wet coffin littered with dead flesh and dread. Reasonable, in my eyes. Throughout the entire plane, people were trampling over each other to reach one of the emergency exits. To this day, I remember the squeals of a young woman being stomped on by the parade of selfish lunatics rushing to the windows, a sound branded into my memory bank that often echoes to me late at night. Was the blatant crushing of a woman's skull worth it for the ruthless deviants who took her life to save theirs? Well, what do you think? If you answer no, then congratulations. Welcome aboard the sad, pessimistic boat where I preside. If you answered yes, then I'm sorry to say you're an idiot. The murderers' efforts were futile, as their bodies piled up like Jenga blocks. No regard for each other's well-beings or lives. Human nature at work. Alas, I spotted an emergency exit window in the back of the plane. An exit that was blissfully overlooked and available. Gushing with excitement, I hurtled over my fellow passengers and seeped through their malicious shoving and flailing, reaching my destination only to find a brick house-sized obstacle waiting for me. The exit was blocked by an insanely gigantic woman, whose dead body remained perched up in her seat, leaning against the door. A plump, round body silhouetted the most vital exit in a water-soaked death trap and cloaked it from my fellow ticking clocks. For that, I thank her. She must have been tickling 300 pounds and was at least in her late 70s, which is surprising because I didn't know hippos lived that long. Fluids continued to filling the plane as I looked back at the mob. Mass hysteria in a time of despair. These people were going to die, but I was not one of them. For a second, I even pitied them. No one deserved to die like this. An exhilarating death, at least. They'll be remembered for a time, Sensationalism will eat this story up and feed it to the masses until they grow bored and find something else to eat. Being remembered is no small accomplishment, though. Each name and picture will be shown and cried over. Comment sections and fools will say it's a conspiracy or blame the president, but eventually they'll all be forgotten. How tragic. An idea that shot through my brain for one measly second. 1 second was long enough, as my priorities shifted to something more important. My life. I looked up at the elephant-sized piñata and wondered how I could get it down. Asking for help would have been too hazardous, not that they would have even heard me, and I knew my toddler-sized muscles wouldn't be able to sustain the insurmountable weight. I climbed up next to the woman, looking frantically for her seatbelt. By some miracle, the airplane staff must have found one big enough for the behemoth. Nicely done, JetBlue. Following a few unsuccessful belt clicks, the strap gave away. The woman struck the ground with a thunderous thump, so loud the sound traveled to the bewildered herd of living dead, drawing the attention of several in the midsection. Without hesitation, I tugged at the exit door, hoping I could rip it open before my friends fought me for it. Insurmountable water pressure made it near impossible to make any traction with the handle, my veins and hands beating red as I put every bit of strength I had into the battle of gravity. A struggle that was interrupted when 2 passengers came by the door, surprisingly ready to help from below. "We work together as a team," said a petite woman in a high-pitched voice, whose American girl-sized body barely cracked the century mark in weight. The help of someone who was surprisingly not already dead from starvation failed to inspire much confidence. I was shocked that any of them could even speak amidst a time like that. Animal urges are hard to subside during a frenzy of adrenaline. Containing them is no easy task. Luckily for me, little Barbie was not alone in her conquest. To her left stood a man who towered over the crowd, ripped out of his mind and jacked up on steroids. Like a brain-dead gorilla, he pounded against his chest and roared as he grabbed at the exit door. The 3 of us pulled with synchronicity, screaming at the top of our lungs while we wailed away, my pair of air sacs exploding from exhaustion as I hollered like a siren, exasperating myself while hope bled before me. Eventually, a miracle occurred. The door's latch shifted, teasing us with a gradual ease and tension until the floodgates snapped open. It was as if a hurricane was waiting on the other side of the door, eager to spring into our house and piss on our carpets. A massive wave of water entered through the compacted hole and suplexed my new companions into the ground. The ocean kept pouring in gallon after gallon, expediting the aircraft's plummet. My giant gorilla friend was submerged under the waves, flailing his arms around, grasping at any form of solace he could find. My walking popsicle stick was taken by the current to the other side of the plane, joining the crumbling stack that presided over the drowning midsection. Before me, water was funneling in like torpedoes, relentlessly stomping on the minor embers of optimism that scorched in the dark, decrepit hole of my brain. Following a few lengthy seconds of doubt, there was a brief lull in the behemoth's powerful current, the last glimmer of hope waiting to be seized, and I jumped at the opportunity. As I sprang headfirst through the influx of water, my head jolted back and forth, narrowly escaping the venom of whiplash. Rapidly, the underwater tornado coiled and churned my body while I ripped at my jacket cord. My life vest bubbled as a smile whipped across my face. Pressure disintegrated while I blissfully ascended up the decadent surface. An angel vacuumed out from the hellfire below. Following an uptake of sea salt and oceanic froth, my eyes and ears opened to the new world lying before me. A world in which I left children crying for help, adults fighting for life, and rose from the abyss with adrenaline clogging my veins. There I was, blood in my mouth, water in my lungs, and not an ounce of guilt in me. The sky glittered with a pale moonlight. A blackened theater composed of stars, cracking about like popcorn in clouds that corkscrewed and twisted in an almost frantic fashion. Something so ravishing amidst a time of horror. The surrounding water was lukewarm and still, roping against my pores like silk, bedecked with delicate waves that danced around the sinking plane. Its wing ripped to shreds. Its tail cracked in half. Its cockpit surprisingly fine, as if it was floating in a kiddie pool and was gently pushed over. While analyzing the wreckage before me, devilish torment ensued as competing thoughts raced down an alleyway of cognitive dissonance. If I was being objectively honest, there was still a chance I could have saved at least some of the passengers. Not a chance I took. My life was at stake, and I couldn't possibly roll the dice. I couldn't go back. Everyone was going to die, and unless Aquaman was about to show up, there was nothing anyone could have done. I know my capabilities and am incredibly aware of my limitations. One of those limitations includes the inability to conjure miracles. And so, I waited, floating statically while deep breaths consumed the spurts of stress the sight before me caused. My head decompressing the living, breathing nightmare that kept flashing on a loop inside my brain. It was like Pluto had been summoned from the netherworld or tasked with consuming every living being in its path. The exception being me. Left to my own devices, not even death wanted to spend time with me. I'm not exactly sure if that's tragic or funny. Those lines tend to blur nowadays. Nevertheless, I needed the thought to evaporate, to escape from the forefront of my matter so I could move forward. It was damn near sociopathic, but I couldn't dwell any further on the dwindling lives before me. It was time to wake up, as I was faced with a crucial task. I needed to find a place to go. Unfortunately, there was no shore in sight. In fact, barely anything was in sight. My vision blurred to black while the clouds above cemented together in a fog-riddled shield. A slab that littered the sky, cloaking the moon. Added incentive that propelled me to spurt forward, fueled by the fact that I had to reach land before the swells above me transformed to an influx of hail and pellets. This presented me with a vital question. Should I go left or right? A simple question, but a decision that could either lead me to death or gift me with a slightly prolonged death. I decided to follow my gut and stroked to my left side, attempting to venture through the heavy waves. Waves that adamantly disagreed with my decision as they whipped me backwards, causing a spray of water to fire straight into my nose. The salt-infused spray inflicted a rapid stinging sensation that pulsed through my nostrils. In a panic, I sneezed and wiggled the bridge of my schnoz back and forth, an act that helped realign some of the scattered cartilage at the expense of a liter of blood that pumped down my lips and into the water below. My first surgical procedure that left me 10 pounds lighter, and in desperate need of an IV. While I navigated through Satan's whirlpool, I came to realize that there was no point in fighting the current. Its force was too overwhelming to challenge, especially for someone who is the antithesis of Michael Phelps. Over time, my body became hitched to Poseidon's wagon, as the tide drove me further and further away from the plane. The once thunderous screams became whispers, as I strayed from death and into the unknown. Over time, I was left with nothing more than an eerie silence, growing numb to the sound of crashing waves and wind, and left with nothing else. Darkness dulled my sight, and oblivion clogged my ears, something that became my most feared sound of all. For hours on end, my body trickled along the soulless wasteland, as my body continued to creep into the ocean. My head drummed in a fury of pain as I continued to wiggle the bones of my nose back into place, an ordeal that ended a plodding marathon of nose fluid spewing into the ocean. Rest assured, I was fully aware of the type of creature that takes a liking to a human's nose fluid. I knew I would soon be greeted by a hulking pair of demonic teeth. There I was, a prime midnight snack ready to be engulfed. Drowning or getting ripped to pieces by sharks. That's where I was going. Like some fucked up would-you-rather question. To counter my incessant squabbling, in all honesty, my jacket made the initial swim rather effortless. I simply lied on my back, gently kicking at the frigid water. In some respects, it mirrored the pool from my dreams as I sat weightless atop a blanket of sea foam. It's an effervescent sensation when your dreams become reality. An uncanny revelation we label déjà vu or brush off as a coincidence. For me, it did nothing more than make my stomach swirl and spine vibrate like an electric toothbrush. I was teetering on the daunting edge of a panic attack while my friendly fiend known as anxiety greeted me once again with a sledgehammer to the gut. I knew better than to fall secure inside the acceptance of a brain's delusion. Something wicked was on its way. Then, suddenly, my wave of trepidation was confirmed, as the sky opened from above. In an instant, rain speared through the clouds and crashed into the blue. The clouds swelled into giants in the atmosphere that polluted the surrounding air. These giants threw bolts of lightning that struck dangerously close to my impotent body. The ocean shook and spun me like an ice cube inside a blender, tossing me in and out of its clutch while I choked upon its fury, a predator toying with me like desperate prey. God's cruel trick was becoming stale while I heaved myself to the surface, drained and depleted from head to toe while I sucked in any remnants of oxygen available to me. Seeds of doubt grew into acceptance of the fact that I would likely die. Maybe I should have stayed in the plane, or maybe I should have found an inflatable raft, or that made too much sense. After a while, my mind became restless as the aquatic legion's constant lashings of waterboarding. In a last-ditch effort to evade the torture, I flung my shoes off and repeatedly kicked at the water below me. This too grew very tiresome and was actually a rather negligent decision on my part. Wasn't land my desired destination? Wouldn't shoes help someone walk on said land? Obvious questions and answers I ignored. Logic, my best friend jumping ship when the going got rough. What a bastard. Time trickled by with each sputtering thrash while I hovered above the abyss, my blood slithering into diffusion while I waited for the inevitable. An eternity of time within the ocean's grasp, and yet no indication of time's passing was to be seen as the sky failed to deviate from its harrowing shade of onyx. The only break from the sluggish journey came in the form of a mysterious intruder. My mind took pause as a sudden bubbling could be felt below the flesh of my toes. A vortex of movement then sunk my heart 1,000 flights. My time had come. Jaws had finally arrived to finish the job, an exalted megalodon ready to make a heaping slice of dangling white meat. And so I waited, closing my eyes while my body pulsed in expectation, like pondering which part the beast would choose first. My money was on the legs. I've always had nice legs. Instead, the monster that greeted me was devoid of sandpaper-like skin, bladed teeth, and an infernal set of doll's eyes. To my surprise, my skin was kissed by hundreds of meaty tentacles, concrete suction that placed my lower half in a state of paralysis. From the corner of my eye, I could see a wave the size of a skyscraper approaching, growing before my eyes until it rose to the moon, the tip vacuumed up by the clouds. I couldn't help but chuckle to myself, trapped in a series of unfortunate events that were unfathomably surreal, chained to a kraken's cuff and seconds away from being squashed by a mountain. Just as the wave was about to split my skull in two, I was pulled dozens of feet into the bile, my ears snapping from pressure and my eyes bleeding with salt. The monster held me within its dreaded cellar, curling around my limbs and searing against my skin for several seconds, the longest seconds of my life, trapped in a breathless bubble of warmth. Not long after, the bastard started its next perilous game. I was heaved through the water, atop the blissful surface where another ghastly wave was forming from afar, my head whipping back and forth as I grasped for air, a breath that lasted but a few moments as I was ripped right back into the beast's playpen. Countless arms coiled against my body like ravenous snakes, hugging it tightly and impounding pressure while the ocean spun around us. This time, I was under the depths for a minute. An entire fucking minute. They say an octopus has 8 legs? Well, I wouldn't be surprised if my monster had a horde of friends as tentacles smacked against me in droves, likely driven by curiosity to touch upon a fool who ventured into their homes amidst a hurricane's wrath. Again, I was flung into the air. This time I was left to my own devices while I shook in a manic-fueled frenzy, hurling seawater from my lungs while I looked around in urgency. Still, my world was black, and the sky above was crying tears of hail. It felt like the crown of my brain was being pounded on by copper coins while I wailed away, unable to stifle my tears in sorrow. My eyes, fuming with a salty sting, still doing their best to spot any more battering waves. To my luck, none were present. To my dismay, this did not stop my tentacle torturers from prolonging another round of fun. I was plunged countless feet below, with a speed like never before, as if they wanted my corpse to writhe against the basement floor. Suddenly, a flare of lightning struck above, casting a spotlight that shined atop my once blackened surroundings, revealing my new friends for but a second in all their gory detail. amber serrated skin, and soulless eyes that watched me in horror. There were several of them, each holding a different part of my body, keeping me still while the whirlpool danced. Light faded while thunder drummed ahead. It was cruel that I was still alive, able to feel and fear all hellfire that God threw my way. A final lesson for the betrayal I bestowed upon his creations I left for dead. Despite his efforts, I lived, breathless for another minute while my lungs shriveled into depletion, ready to burst and explode until I was rushed to the surface, thrown several feet into the air while a bolt of energy sprang up my neck, my eyes opening up to another skyscraper that smacked me into an unconscious bliss, my mind shutting off, knocked out, down for the count. I couldn't tell you how long I resided inside my state of limbo, a wonderland where a sense of calmness coupled with a feeling of euphoria as your sight fades and your last chapter is being written. My mind thought it was clever, but I noticed its little lie, its internal mirage, a song and dance designed to distract me from reality, effective, and yet we both knew our inevitable fate and its inability to cloak reality from me forever, a blanket of deception that would eventually unravel, and unravel it did. My brain had become activated, eyes flickering open to a world that was entirely foreign. No sharks, no krakens, no rain, and no waves. The daunting nightshade evaporated as the glow of the morning engulfed the earth. A tropical burst of orange that sheened above, releasing a blanket of heat that curled under my skin, easing the pain that oozed from my face. A steady heartbeat sang while I attempted to lift my head from the phone. Instead, an ache of pain held me steady while I continued to glide through the water. Below me, for some bewildered reason, I could still feel tentacles grasping at my pruned skin. My body was being driven to a destination I did not know. In truth, I did not care. No longer could I believe the lunacy in my mind. I was far too haggard to even give it a thought. The sky was turning to day as the sun illuminated my final hours. I was once again in a bubble, a nestle to protect me from predators in the daunting blue graveyard they populated, a bubble that would lift me into the sky and transport me to the glorious afterlife. Then came a sudden splash atop my face that snapped me out of a joyous daze. The tentacles released their grasp as cherry-red cretins slithered away, venturing deep into the depths where my eyes could not track. I was back to square one, just a man trapped in an ocean, a thought that made my bubble explode. Before I had the chance to moan and holler at my desperate circumstances, an eagerness overthrew me as a beautiful sight filled my retina. Off, 50 yards in the distance, was a shore of a luminous paradise set nearby, plush with dazzling sage trees that swayed with the passing winds, and welcoming golden doorstep. A finely tethered mattress of stone awaited me, ever so alluring while I crept towards it. My dance with death had dissipated as the thrashing waves halted to a complete stop. The water below me was glossy and clear, a sight of which often only seen in computer monitors of vacation-hungry employees. Guilty as charged, I was no different. Enraptured by the surrealism before me, I splashed and zoomed towards the oasis before it had the chance to remove its mischievous mask and transform into the raging mirage I thought it to be. Instead, the picture failed to fade, and as my feet kissed the ocean floor, I couldn't help but wail tears of joy. Lunging through the tepid mist until I couldn't travel any further, standing before crystallized perfection, I felt unworthy. A wall of canopy blocked the next step in my adventure, leaving my mind to wander onto dreamlike possibilities. Before I had the chance to enter the emerald orb, my legs fell from under me, my face crashing onto the creamy cushion that lied below. Drunk with luck and laughing like a fool, crawling deeper into land until I couldn't crawl any further, exhaustion gobbling me up while my face dove into the precious earth, gifting me with a mouthful of dry sand, coarse crumbling clay that fizzed against my tongue, but I couldn't care less. It was proof I had made it through the ocean's gauntlet, and it was the best taste I've ever had. I couldn't help but smile.